Good Shabbos. This week is Parsha Shmini, but instead of talking about the portion, I'd like to give a brief summary of the history, the significance, and some of the rules of saying Kaddish. Kaddish was first mentioned in a small tractate called Tractate Sofrim, probably written in the 700s, and by definition, the idea of the Kaddish is to be Makadesh Shem Shemayim, to sanctify the name of God. And it's a public proclamation. And that's why Kaddish is specifically said with a minyan in public, because the idea is to spread and proclaim the name of God. It originally had nothing to do with mourners, and the idea of associating it with mourners probably came in the 1100s and 1200s. As an example, Maimonides, who wrote a Code of Jewish Law, mentions the Kaddish many times, but never talks about it being associated with a mourner. Later in the Shulchan Aruch, which is the Code of Jewish Law written in the 1500s, it's already established that it's associated with mourners. But the basic idea of what a mourner is supposed to do and why he's supposed to do it was really to do a mitzvah, specifically was given to be the leader of the tefillah, of the prayer, and by leading the prayer, he was doing something which would spread the name of God, and do a mitzvah which would be in the schus of the merit of his father or mother. And then the Kaddish also got associated with it. Then what happened was not everyone was able to lead the tefillah, the prayer, either because there's only one person or because very few people, especially in those times, were able to lead. And therefore they said, we have to now add a Kaddish for those that are mourners. And the Kaddish Yasam, which we say, which is the mourner's Kaddish, was originally added actually just for children who couldn't lead the prayer. So they were completely cut off from saying the Kaddish if their parent died, and therefore they created this Kaddish Yasam. And then what happened was there was only one person supposed to say, just like you only have one person leading a prayer, you don't have two people at the same time, only one person would say the Kaddish. So what happened was then they started adding Kaddish all these places in order to give a chance for multiple mourners to say Kaddish. Otherwise, only one would be able to say it during any specific tefillah, any specific prayer. So they started adding more. And originally, it would only be one person could say it. You couldn't say it, as I mentioned before, all at one time. Why? Very simply, because if more than one person is saying it, there's a rule actually in halacha, a law, of that you can't hear two voices at one time, except for one or two exceptions. So it wasn't said by more than one person at a time. So what started happening, though, is in Sephardic countries, the custom started spreading that more than one person would say it at a time, and they would say it in unison. And eventually that custom spread to Ashkenazi countries, and now most Ashkenazim will allow multiple people to say Kaddish at one time. But that's not completely true because, for example, Yekis, which are German Jews, and some specific communities do not allow more than one person to say Kaddish. And therefore, either you add a Kaddish or you don't say it until the next time you have a chance during that day. And the idea of saying multiple Kaddishim for one person, that's something which then it becomes added afterwards, and customs started accruing, and mystical traditions started being added that said that every time you say a Kaddish, it adds something else to the soul of the departed. But that's not the way it was originally. So, very briefly, what we have is Kaddish is something which is important prayer. It's a public prayer. It's generally supposed to be said by one person. The custom then developed that it was said by more than one person at a time, and in many congregations that's allowed. But there's an emphasis that it has to be heard. And the problem we have in many shuls is that you have people, one person in the back, one person in the front, one person in the middle, all saying Kaddish at different paces, and you can't really hear anybody. And that's a major problem. And the way to solve that is that in many shuls, anyone who's saying Kaddish gets together usually right behind the bima or it could be together in the back. It doesn't matter. But to make sure to make sure and to that all people saying Kaddish are saying it at the exact same time. And then that leads to another question which arises. What about if you have a different version of Kaddish? There's people who daven Nusach Ashkenaz, which is the Ashkenaz version. There's people who daven Sephardi people, and then there's Hasidim who use a different Nusach Sfard. It's called another version of Sfard, which is sort of in between Ashkenaz and Sfard, and each one has a different version of the Kaddish. And for example, in our shul here, we've allowed people to say a Kaddish their own version when they're saying the Kaddish, which is not the Kaddish said by the Chazan, by the leader. But the truth is that's not the ideal. There are congregations which allow that. There are rabbis which might say that's okay. But following the lead of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, who was one of the great halachic decisors in in North America in the 20th century, um, I I prefer to follow his ruling, and that you cannot say a Kaddish in a different nusach, all right, a different version. It doesn't matter if you're saying the one which you're leading the prayer or you're saying the mourner's Kaddish, since by definition it's a public prayer. You have to say it according to the public, the congregation, the community that you're in. And so, for example, in our shul, we daven Nusach Ashkenaz, the version of Ashkenazi davening, then everyone should be saying the same Kaddish and not be saying it in at a different pace. So I want to say the same Kaddish at the same pace. And like I said, in our shul, we allowed it, but I think at this point, it becomes a problem. People can't hear it. It gets confusing. One person is overriding somebody else. You're not saying Amen at the proper time. And therefore, from now on, we're going to make sure that everyone says the exact same Kaddish and everyone says it at the same pace. And also, it's important that one doesn't say it so loud that you can't hear somebody else. Of course, some people like to say it lower, some people like to say it louder, but the attempt should be that everyone's talking at the same time. So therefore, when the rest of the people in the shul hear it, they hear clearly. And that's very important. And this general rule about following the same nusach, the same version, is true throughout the tefillah, throughout the prayer. So again, Rabbi Feinstein says when it comes to Kedusha, right, when we say Kaddish Shimcha Be'olam, the Kedusha in the Shemona Esrei, in the repetition of the Shemona Esrei, or on Shabbos it starts Nagditzach, Nagdishach, right, or Nagdishach, Nagditzach, right, it starts differently. Everyone should be saying the same version, because anything which is necessary to be said in public, which is kedusha and amen to a blessing or to kaddish and all of those types of things, they have to be said the way the community says it, because otherwise you're creating different customs at one time. And there's a rule, it's called in Hebrew lo sasu agudas agudas. You shouldn't make different groupings. Everyone should have the same. There shouldn't be different customs being presented at the exact same time. So you shouldn't be saying something and answering a different version than the rest of the shul is supposed to say. Rabbi Feinstein actually goes so far to say that he prefers that even when you're praying silently, you should go after the custom of the shul you're in. But if that's a problem, most people don't do that. So when they're praying silently, you could say your own version. But even at that point, even things that you're saying silently, you shouldn't say it out loud and give the impression that you're saying a different version. So you have to be very quiet when you're doing something outside of the community. That's a general rule. There's one other rule which has come into question, is about women saying Kaddish. Now, there's many different opinions. We could one time, if necessary, if somebody wants to ask me privately, I can give you the different sources. But there's some people who didn't allow women to say Kaddish, and it seems that women saying Kaddish is essentially never was considered a problem, but it just wasn't the custom, it wasn't the tradition. And some felt it was immodest, but at least in the modern Orthodox shuls, they follow the opinion of many great rabbis. And even, again, Rabbi Feinstein mentions that back in Lithuania, who knows when, women would be coming in to say Kaddish even without a mechitza. One or two women would come in the back of the shul and say Kaddish. That was acceptable. And he says that the need for a mechitza is only when it's on more of a permanent basis. So therefore, if you're gathering in the back of a social hall and praying, even though there's no mechitza, it's okay. sometimes even in a shiva, it doesn't have to have a mechitza. And here, since the woman or two are coming in just temporarily, it's okay if there's no mechitza, even in the shul proper. That's what he's talking about. And he says they came in to say Kaddish. He says that just in passing. It seems that in Lithuania, and it's mentioned explicitly in different places, that women were allowed to say Kaddish. So again, there's different rulings by different rabbis. Some say women shouldn't say Kaddish at all. Some say they're allowed to say Kaddish, but they shouldn't say Kaddish by themselves, only with other men. And some say no, a woman could say Kaddish even if there's no other man. And again, I follow the ruling of the rabbis that say that that's okay. And in most modern Orthodox shuls, that is actually the case, that a woman is allowed to say Kaddish. And there should be no problem with her saying Kaddish for the minyan, and everyone answers Amen properly. And we sometimes have to understand that although you might come from, a place in another city which had a different ruling and different customs, the general rule is that you accept the ruling and the customs of the shul in which you're in. So I want to try to create some consistency, at least in our shul, and I think honestly that should be the norm across the board. That it shouldn't be this time of saying Kaddish shouldn't be a time of confusion, but rather it should be clear, and that everyone feels that they're being heard and answer Amen afterwards. Have a very good Shabbos, and we'll continue another time with perhaps some of the maybe the history of this. But if not, please feel free to call me or send an email asking me any questions about this. Good Shabbos.